There are stories that drift through time like whispers, and there are stories so powerful that entire civilizations rise and fall trying to protect them. The tale of the vanished Book of Kemet belongs to the second kind. It is a story not written in fairy tales or legends, but in the cracked stones, the ancient papyri, the carved temples, and the memory of a continent that once led the world in knowledge. When people today speak about ancient Egypt, many picture pyramids, kings, or golden tombs. But the elders of that land believed their greatest treasure was not gold, monuments, or empires. Their deepest treasure was knowledge. Knowledge so transformative that they spent generations trying to preserve it, even when time and invaders sought to erase it forever. The vanished Book of Kemet represents not a single physical volume, but a body of wisdom, a set of teachings, a philosophy of life that placed identity, purpose, and clarity above fear or confusion. These writings shaped how people understood the universe, how they lived with discipline, how they developed character, and how they built communities strong enough to last thousands of years. And although the physical book may be missing, the echoes of its wisdom are still alive for those willing to listen. The ancient people of Kemet believed that every generation was responsible for carrying knowledge forward. They believed that nothing was more dangerous for a nation than forgetting who it is. They believed that when wisdom disappears, people lose their foundation, their confidence, and ultimately their direction. And so they wrote endlessly, on stone, wood, papyrus, clay, and metal, because they understood that memory alone was not enough to protect truth. Imagine a civilization so committed to learning that children were taught astronomy, mathematics, writing, health sciences, moral discipline, and leadership all before the age of 50. Imagine communities where elders were respected not for their age alone but for the amount of wisdom they carried. Imagine a world where knowledge was not a luxury reserved for a few but a responsibility shared by all. This is the world that produced the vanished Book of Kemet. It was a world built on intention, clarity, discipline, and purpose. And because of that, they were able to do what many today still cannot fully explain. They built monuments that aligned perfectly with the stars using mathematics so advanced that modern engineers still debate how they achieved it. They practiced medicine documented in detail thousands of years before other civilizations understood anatomy. They mapped constellations, tracked time, and calculated cycles long before telescopes existed. Their wisdom was practical, powerful, and deeply connected to understanding life itself. And so when new empires rose, when conquerors arrived, when libraries burned, when papyrus crumbled, and when power-hungry rulers feared the influence of knowledge, these writings were hidden, scattered, buried, or lost. Some say the book disappeared because it contained secrets too valuable for the world to see. Others say it vanished because time slowly erased it. But the truth is likely simpler. Civilizations risk losing their wisdom the moment they stop valuing it. The vanished Book of Kemet is not just a symbol of lost pages. It is a reminder of what happens when people allow others to define their narrative, rewrite their identity, and shrink their greatness. When a culture stops protecting its knowledge, someone else will rewrite it for them. But here is the real message. Even though the book is gone, the wisdom is not. It survived through proverbs, oral traditions, stone carvings, temple teachings, and the memory of African civilizations who carried fragments of this wisdom into West, East, Central, and Southern Africa. It survived through symbols, through rituals, through standards of leadership and community building that still exist today, and it survived through people who refused to forget where they came from. When you study the wisdom of Kemet carefully, you discover that their primary message was simple yet profound. The greatest power is the power to understand yourself. They taught that every human being carries potential like a seed waiting for the right moment to grow. They taught that discipline begins in the mind long before it appears in your actions. They taught that your character is your real wealth. They taught that a person who cannot master their emotions cannot master their future. And they taught that knowledge, when applied with courage, can transform any life, any family, any community, any nation. In today's world, people search for motivation everywhere. Videos, speeches, books, influence. But the ancient people of Kemet believed that motivation already lives inside you. They believed that your greatest strength is not what the world gives you but what you build inside yourself. They believed in quiet power, consistent effort, self-mastery, and the kind of inner discipline that does not break when life becomes difficult. They believed that every challenge is an invitation to grow, not a reason to quit. The vanished book of Kemet reminds us that wisdom is not something you wait for. It is something you pursue. It is something you protect. It is something you live. You can lose possessions, you can lose opportunities, you can lose relations. But when you possess wisdom, you can rebuild everything you lost. That is why the elders of Kemet treated knowledge as life itself. That is why they passed it down carefully from one generation to the next. And that is why the disappearance of the book is more than a historical tragedy, it is a warning. If you do not protect your identity, someone else will redefine it. If you do not guard your history, someone else will edit it. If you do not build your own future, someone else will decide it for you. And if you do not understand your own power, the world will tell you that you have none. But you do. You always have. And that is what the ancient wisdom teaches. It teaches that greatness does not begin with applause or recognition. It begins with clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you possess, and what you can become. Kemet thrived for thousands of years not because they had more resources but because they had more They believed in long-term thinking. They believed in teaching the next generation early. They believed in documenting everything. They believed in accountability. And they believed that every person was born with a purpose. You may not have access to the vanished book itself, but its message is still available for you today. Every time you choose learning over distraction, you are following its path. Every time you develop discipline, you are honoring its teaching. Every time you build something meaningful, even if the world does not see it yet, you are walking the same road the ancient builders walked. Every time you refuse to let your past limit your future, you are proving that wisdom is stronger than any obstacle. Every time you reclaim your identity, you restore a piece of the book that was lost. The story of the vanished book is ultimately a story about you, about what you choose to preserve, about what you choose to forget, about what you choose to become. Knowledge alone will not change your life, but knowledge applied with discipline will. Purpose alone will not shape your destiny, but purpose infused with consistent action will. Dreams alone will not elevate you, but dreams aligned with wisdom. And greatness alone will not arrive, but greatness built on character will. You come from people who wrote ideas powerful enough to be protected for thousands of years. You come from people who believed in generational knowledge long before modern systems existed. You come from a lineage that documented the stars, designed timeless structures, and taught the world principles that still guide societies today. Even when empires tried to burn their libraries, erase their names, or silence their teachings, the wisdom survived because truth always finds a way to endure. And so the question today is simple. What will you do with the wisdom that has reached you? Will you let it, or will you carry it forward? Will you live passively, or will you live intentionally? Will you let the world define you, or will you define yourself? Just as the vanished book of Kemet was guarded, preserved, and cherished, your mind deserves the same protection. Treat your knowledge like treasure. Treat your identity like something sacred. Treat your journey like something meaningful, and treat your purpose like something worth fighting for. You do not need all the answers right now, you only need the courage to begin. The wisdom you seek is already searching for you. The path you want is already opening. The greatness you feel inside is not imagination, it is heritage. It is memory, it is power, and it is time to awaken. The vanished book of Kemet may never be found physically, but the wisdom it carried is alive in every person willing to rise, learn, grow, and become more than the world expects. You are one of those people, and your story is just beginning. When knowledge is powerful enough to threaten empires, its disappearance does not erase it. It only makes the world hungrier for its truth. Throughout history, every time a civilization produced wisdom strong enough to shift the balance power, someone tried to silence it. Sometimes it happened through the burning of libraries. Sometimes through the banning of books, sometimes through the rewriting of history by those who feared what the truth would reveal. But what the world never understood is that knowledge is not made of paper alone. It is made of memory, culture, identity, and the unbreakable desire of human beings to search for meaning. When a book is removed, the curiosity it leaves behind becomes even more intense. When a story is suppressed, people look deeper. When a truth is buried, someone eventually comes to unearth it. The attempt to hide knowledge often becomes the very thing that makes it impossible to forget. Empires fear knowledge not because it is dangerous in itself, but because it shifts the mindset of people. Once a person understands who they are, they no longer accept limitations. Once a community discovers its history, it no longer bows to misrepresentation. Once a nation recognizes its contribution to the world, it is harder to convince them that they are powerless. That is why certain wisdom traditions, especially those rooted in ancient African civilizations like Kemet, have always faced attempts at erasure. Their teachings were not simply philosophical, they were empowering. They taught self-discipline. They taught identity. They taught structure, clarity, moral accountability, emotional control, scientific observation, and the importance of generational responsibility. Such knowledge builds strong people, and strong people cannot be easily controlled. When those in power realized what this wisdom could do, they did what every insecure empire does. They attempted to silence it. Yet history shows that suppressing truth rarely kills it. In fact, it often makes it immortal. Every civilization that tried to erase knowledge eventually discovered that ideas do not die. They resurface in new forms, in new places, through new people. The more restricted a truth becomes, the more it spreads. The more someone tries to hide it, the more others crave it. Human beings are naturally drawn to what is forbidden, especially when it carries the energy of empowerment. That is why the legacy of Kemet's vanished wisdom continues to rise today, inspiring millions across the world to reclaim their identity and rediscover their intellectual heritage. The disappearance of ancient books did not stop their influence. Instead, it created a hunger in the hearts of people who sensed that something deeper was missing from their understanding of themselves. That hunger travels across generations, becoming stronger as each century passes. And when people finally uncover fragments of this wisdom in carvings, in songs, in oral traditions, in surviving manuscripts, or even in modern research, they feel something awaken inside them. It is the recognition of a truth that was always meant to reach them, even if the path to get there was interrupted. Knowledge that threatens empires usually carries one message: you are more powerful than you were told. And that is exactly why it cannot stay buried forever. The world today is filled with individuals seeking direction, confidence, purpose, and clarity. Many of them do not realize that ancient African wisdom carries guidance on all of these things. The moment they learn that their ancestors were not passive observers of history but creators of science, mathematics, ethics, architecture, literature, and governance, a shift happens. They begin to see themselves differently. They begin to carry themselves with more dignity. They begin to expect more from life. They begin to challenge the beliefs that were imposed on them. This inner transformation is what empires fear most, and yet it is unstoppable once it begins. The vanished knowledge of Kemet is an example of how the human spirit protects truth, even when history tries to hide it. The wisdom that once shaped minds continues to travel through time because ideas cannot be conquered. Even if you destroy the libraries, the thoughts survive in the people. Even if you ban the books, the memory survives in the culture. Even if you erase the records, the truth survives in the human desire to seek deeper understanding. Knowledge may disappear from shelves, but it cannot disappear from the human heart. Eventually someone remembers, someone questions, someone searches, and someone finds. That is why disappearing knowledge often gains more power than it had when it was widely available. When people discover that something was intentionally hidden from them, the desire to uncover it becomes urgent. It becomes personal. It becomes a mission. The missing book becomes a symbol of neglected identity and lost potential. And as more individuals reclaim the truth, a collective awakening begins. That awakening can reshape communities, restore pride, and rebuild cultural foundations that were weakened by centuries of missing. The more you study the patterns of history, the clearer it becomes. Anything powerful enough to be banned is powerful enough to change lives. The vanished wisdom of Kemet is a reminder that the truth has a long memory. It always finds a way to rise, even when the world tries to bury it beneath time, conquest, or false narratives. And every person who seeks this knowledge becomes part of its resurrection. They become carriers of wisdom that once threatened empires and now empowers a new generation. So the disappearance of ancient teachings is not a sign of defeat. It is a sign of how valuable they truly were. The world only hides what it fears. It only silences what can transform. It only erases what has the power to elevate minds beyond control. And once you understand that, you no longer see the vanished book as a tragedy alone. You see it as evidence that the wisdom was extraordinary. You see it as proof that this knowledge still matters. You see it as motivation to search deeper, learn more, rise higher, and protect your identity with the same determination that ancient civilizations once used to protect theirs. Your hunger for truth today is the continuation of a journey that began thousands of years ago, and every step you take toward understanding yourself is another step toward restoring what empires failed to erase. A lost book is never just pages missing from history. It is potential stolen from generations who deserve to know their greatness. When a piece of knowledge disappears, it is not only information that vanishes, it is identity, direction, confidence, and the sense of belonging that should have been passed from one generation to the next. A lost book represents years of silence where a voice should have spoken. It represents opportunities that were never realized because the teachings that could have inspired them were kept in the dark. And it represents millions of people growing up without the map that was originally created for them. The disappearance of a book, especially one containing the wisdom of a great civilization like Kemet, is not an accident of time. It is usually the result of fear. Fear from those who understood that knowledge can reshape the minds of people and elevate entire society. When powerful teachings vanish, it means someone recognized the strength within them and decided that the world was safer without that strength being widely known. But what they didn't realize is that knowledge does not fade simply because the pages are gone. It lingers in the memory of a people. It survives in the stories told by elders. It hides within cultural expressions, symbols, traditions, and values. And it waits for the right generation to come searching for it again. Imagine how differently the world would look if every African child grew up knowing the scientific achievements of their ancestors, the philosophies they created, the libraries they built, the universities they founded, the systems of governance they mastered, and the models of discipline they upheld. Imagine if they understood from a young age that greatness was not something to chase but something they inherited. That is what a lost book steals. It interrupts continuity. It takes away the foundation that could have strengthened self-esteem, ambition, and identity. When teachings vanish, people spend decades trying to rebuild what should have been theirs from the beginning. Generations should have known that their ancestors mapped the stars with precision before other nations even understood the sky. They should have known that ancient African civilizations practiced medicine with documented diagnosis, surgery, and herbal sciences long before modern medical schools existed. They should have known that their societies valued education so deeply that knowledge was considered a duty, not a luxury. Losing those books meant losing evidence of excellence. And when people are denied proof of their greatness, they begin to doubt it. But the truth is that the power of a lost book often grows stronger through the very act of erasure. When history removes something important, people eventually feel that something is missing, even if they don't yet know what it is. They sense the absence, they feel the gap. They look around and wonder why their achievements seem underrepresented, why their contributions are minimized, why their ancestors are depicted as background figures instead of central architects of civilization. And that internal questioning becomes the spark that pushes them to seek what was taken. A lost book can inspire more curiosity than 1,000 surviving texts. It calls out to the spirit, asking people to search deeper, question more, and refuse the shallow version of history handed to them. It awakens a hunger for truth, and that hunger becomes generation. Parents pass it to children, communities pass it to youth, and one day someone finds a fragment, a sentence carved in stone, a preserved papyrus, a proverb passed down orally, a scientific method hidden in an ancient tradition, and suddenly the truth begins to assemble itself again. Knowledge that was once stolen begins to reappear in new forms. When a book is lost, the world loses the clarity it could have offered. Perhaps there were lessons inside it about leadership, emotional discipline, unity, or character building that could have strengthened families and nations today. Perhaps there were scientific observations that could have advanced technology sooner. Perhaps there were philosophies that could have changed how we treat one another. Its disappearance creates a world where people must struggle harder to discover what should have been inherited effortlessly. But even though the physical book is gone, the potential it held does not disappear. It transfers into the next generation as a silent responsibility. It challenges them to rise, to learn, to rebuild, to revive what was erased. The loss becomes fuel, the absence becomes motivation, and the desire to reclaim what was taken becomes stronger than any obstacle placed in the way. The most powerful part of this story is that even without the original pages, the greatness those books described is still alive. It is alive in the creativity of the youth, in the resilience of communities, in the intelligence that continues to break barriers, and in the determination to rewrite the narrative with truth instead of the edited version handed down by history. Every new discovery, every restored manuscript, every archaeological finding is a step toward restoring what was stolen, and every person who chooses to learn, to explore, to question, and to seek knowledge becomes a guardian of the legacy that once lived in those lost books. A lost book does more than disappear. It becomes a symbol of what people once were, what they still are, and what they can become again. It reminds us that greatness does not rely on pages. It relies on people. Knowledge can be hidden, but it cannot be destroyed. Truth can be delayed, but it cannot be erased. And every generation has the power to reclaim what was stolen, restore what was lost, and rebuild the path that was interrupted. You are part of that generation, and your desire to understand your history is proof that the potential which disappeared with those books is returning through you. The wisdom of Kemet survived not because it was written, but because people carried fragments of its light in their actions, culture, and memory. When we look deep into human history, especially the ancient story of Kemet, we often imagine that knowledge survives only through books, carved walls, scrolls, or monuments. But the truth is far more powerful than that. The greatest ideas of a civilization do not live on because someone recorded them in ink or etched them into stone. They live because human beings breathe life into them, carry them forward, and pass them on in ways that can never be erased. The real endurance of Kemet's wisdom lies in how people translated knowledge into daily living. When invaders destroyed temples, when libraries burned, when records were lost, the memory of Kemet did not vanish. It moved quietly inside the habits, stories, customs, and rhythms of the descendants who refused to let the essence fade. People became living libraries, walking archives of a world that once stood as one of the greatest centers of human intellect. Even when the written teachings were scattered or lost, the spirit of what they represented survived in art, in the way communities organized themselves, in how elders taught the youth, and in the way people understood nature, time, and responsibility. The light of Kemet was never confined to papyrus. It was embedded in worldview, in the belief that knowledge was sacred, that wisdom served a purpose, and that every generation had a duty to protect what they inherited. And so, even when the physical texts disappeared, the principles lived on in coded forms, symbols woven into jewelry, patterns in architecture, myths retold through oral traditions, and philosophies that traveled across regions, cultures, and centuries. What survived was not a book, but a way of thinking, a commitment to seek understanding, to honor the past, and to pursue truth, even when history tries its best to bury it. The strength of Kemet's wisdom lies in its ability to shape identity, even without its original written structure. Many communities across Africa retain certain practices without knowing their origin, yet their roots echo the ancient ways. Ideas about community, respect for elders, balance with anger, and the understanding that every person carries a unique purpose are reflections of that early brilliance. These ideas traveled across deserts, mountains, and oceans. They passed through generations, sometimes quietly, sometimes forcefully, but always present, always alive. And this is why the wisdom could not be destroyed. A conqueror can steal a scroll, but not a worldview. A fire can destroy a library, but not a people who embody the knowledge. What makes the survival of Kemet's wisdom extraordinary is that it proves something about us today. Real power is not in possession, but in presence. It shows that a culture's most valuable treasure is not what it holds, but what it teaches. The people of Kemet understood that knowledge meant nothing if it stayed hidden. That is why they taught through symbols, through rituals, through stories that could outlive empire. They embedded meaning in places that would survive even if temples fell, meaning inside people themselves. You can see it in languages that still use echoes of old concepts, in traditions that mirror ancient values, and in the unbroken thread of dignity that runs through African identity worldwide. This is not accidental. It is the result of centuries of intentional preservation by communities who refused to let the past be erased. Human memory became the final sanctuary of Kemet's wisdom, and this is a reminder for us today that the things we do, the knowledge we pass on, and the values we uphold matter more than any physical record. We often think history is written in books, but the truth is that history lives in behavior. It lives in the courage to continue tradition. It lives in the stories that elders tell to children. It lives in the way people protect their language, their art, their music, and their identity. When you understand that, you realize that each generation contributes to the story not by rewriting it, but by carrying it. Just like the people centuries ago carried the wisdom of Kemet, every person today carries a part of their heritage, even if they do not realize it. The survival of Kemet's wisdom teaches us something timeless. Knowledge is not fragile. It is resilient when rooted in human character. Even if every book disappeared tomorrow, the ideas that shaped humanity would still live in the way people think, act, and believe. That is the power of culture. That is the power of memory. And that is the power of a people who refuse to let their origins be forgotten. The vanished book of Kemet may never be recovered, but the deeper truth is that its teachings were never truly lost. They were translated into life itself. They were carried forward in silence, in resilience, and in the determination of generations who understood that the light of wisdom can survive anything as long as someone is willing to carry it.